Sir Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, can I start by warmly welcoming the announcement that you've just made on behalf, I'm sure, of the whole House, and offering our congratulations, again, I'm sure, on behalf of the whole House. Madam Deputy Speaker, this could be a most important week in Parliament for decades. A first Saturday sitting since 1982, only the fifth since the Second World War, and obviously huge decisions to be made. What a shame it is that we start the week with a Queen's speech that's so manifestly not fit for purpose. A political stunt, not a credible programme for government. It's the first time I can remember a Queen's speech being introduced by a government that has no means and, frankly, little intention of implementing it. The Queen's speech includes 7 Brexit bills, and the Prime Minister made a great deal of this yesterday, pretending that this is the centrepiece of the Queen's speech. But close examination tells a very different story. The 2017 Queen's speech said, and I quote, "The government's priority is to secure the best possible deal as the country leaves the EU." After 2 years and 4 months, this year's Queen's speech says the government's priority is to secure the UK's departure from the European Union. Abject failure of government for 2.5 years. And what are those 7 Brexit bills? On analysis, 5 of them are identical to those introduced in the last session. So 5 of the 7 are exactly the same bills. The Agriculture Bill, the Fisheries Bill, the Trade Bill, the Immigration Bill and the Financial Services Bill. All 5 started life in the last parliamentary session. All 5 were then dropped when it became clear that there was no chance they were going to get a majority. This Queen's speech indicates they'll all start again, around the same track. And you can't dress up a step back as a step forward. And then we've got the WAB, the Implementation Bill, floated in the last Parliament, though never introduced. Again, not introduced because the numbers were never there for it. And that was before the government had a majority of -45. I will in just one moment. So the reality of this, of the 7 bills paraded as the centrepiece, 5 are exactly the same as the ones that just been dropped. One's the same as the one the government wouldn't introduce because it didn't think it'd win. That only leaves the lonely old private international law bill. I will in just 1 minute. That leaves the private international law bill. That's undoubtedly important. I think it deals with commercial law and family law and private law. But if that's the summit of the government's new proposals and approach to Brexit, it just underlines how absurd and unnecessary it was to have this Queen's speech. I will give way.
The right honourable gentleman, in his typically eloquent way, has merely rehearsed why this government, why this Parliament is in a state of paralysis, because we are reintroducing these bills time and time again, and it's Groundhog Day every day now. The public is looking on in blank amazement as we continue to procrastinate. Where does he stand on the subject of a general election? Because it seems to me the only way we can act properly as a Parliament is to try and get a majority of whichever party in order that we can enact this legislation.
Well, I'm grateful for that intervention, mainly because it double underlines the point I'm trying to make. This is the second day of a Queen's speech, and I'm challenged on whether we should have a general election. This is supposed to be the opening of a new parliamentary session. Just on the bills, the point I'm making is this, that this pretence of a Queen's speech is a pretence. Those bills got stuck because there wasn't a majority for them. And so we are now reintroducing them. Well, I did promise I'd give way here first.
Extremely grateful to the right honourable for giving way. But what he knows, and the country knows, is that he had the opportunity with all his colleagues to vote for a general election today, on the 15th of October, so many weeks ago. And they did not take that opportunity, so none of this presentation he's making, I'm afraid, stacks up.
I'm not going to vote for a general election until we've got an extension. I'm not going to allow our country to crash out the EU without a deal. That is perfectly straightforward. That is my position. The honourable gentleman may disagree, but that is my position. I'm not I'm not going to vote for a general election until I know that an extension of Article 50 has been secured and we're not leaving without a deal. I promise to give way.
I'm grateful for the He's absolutely right. We can see the desperation on the Conservative benches for a cut-and-run general election. They know very well that the antidote to Brexit is the reality and the real lived experience of Brexit, because I'll tell you, gentlemen, the experience of empty shelves and lack of medicines do not election winners make. Yeah. And when that occurs and you have your election, you're going to go down in flames.
Well,
I'm not. It isn't you, it's they. That's so much better. So Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Just to take this down a tone so we don't just get into trading insults on general elections. I listened very carefully to what the Secretary of State said, and I was troubled. I am genuinely troubled about leaving without a deal, and I know many people are across this House on both sides, and I will genuinely do anything to prevent that. But the do-or-die pledge is just absurd. The talks are going on. They may not resolve this week. If they're still going on the 30th of October, and possibly making progress, and that's the readout, is it really the government's position that do or die it will leave on the 31st of October, notwithstanding that the talks are making progress? It's an absurd position ever to have adopted. I give way.
I'm very grateful to give you way. So to follow through his logic, beyond October the 31st, there's only two outcomes that could have happened. The one, we've left the EU with or without a deal, or there will be an extension. At that point in time, will he now commit that he will vote for a general election if presented on the 1st of November?
I will not vote for a general election until the extension is secured. We are not in that position at the moment. We can trade these discussions all afternoon. The absurdity of the situation is the threat of no deal, which will cause huge harm to this country and I believe fundamentally undermine the Good Friday Agreement, or the idea that you throw away any progress that's been made in the negotiations because you think that the do-or-die pledge is more important. And the question to the Secretary of State, if he wants to answer it, is this. If it comes to the 30th of October and the negotiations are still going on and making progress, is it the government's position that it will then extend to allow that progress to continue, or leave on the 31st? Which is the priority? I would actually like an answer to that question. It's up to the Secretary of State whether he wants to give an answer to it, because our country needs to know. Because it's absurd to say you're on the verge of an agreement, but you're still going to leave because you said you'd leave. Ridiculous situation. And that's the backdrop to today's debate, the ongoing Brexit negotiations. We may or may not know in the next 48 hours whether the Prime Minister will be able to put a deal to this House under the Section 13 procedure. Let's wait and see. I've learnt to be extremely cautious about the sorts of reports that are coming out about the progress that's being made, and I've learnt to wait to scrutinise the final text. I remember standing here at this dispatch box at 10 o'clock at night on the 11th of March when the news of the last deal came through. The Chancellor of Duchy of Lancaster then was receiving the news as he stood on his feet, and we were trying to respond, and that's no criticism of him. That came through, the deal came through dramatically, 10 o'clock at night. 24 hours later, it had fallen apart because the attorney had given us advice on what that deal meant. So I've learnt to wait to see what happens and then to look at the detail of it. I will.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way, but there's been press reports today from Mr Barney that the government, as the Prime Minister, has got to give a legal framework by 12 o'clock tonight. What situation does that start to get? A bit of confusion going on in actual fact. There's no clarity about the government benches at all about this.
No, I thank you for that intervention. That is one of the reports coming through. There are so many reports coming through. They change all the time. But it really underlines the point. It is quite possible, I don't know, that a conclusion will be reached later today that it isn't possible to do a deal by this summit. It may be that that report is accompanied by news of progress. It may be that the suggestion is that the talks go into next week and up towards the date of the 31st of October. The question that the Secretary of State won't answer, he doesn't want to intervene on me, is if that happens and it gets right up to the deadline, is the government's position that do or die we leave, We say, notwithstanding that, we're walking away, we're going without a deal, because we said we would? Or is it the government's position that they will allow time for the talks to continue? And we need an answer on that question. It's a really serious question about the future of our country. And this do-or-die nonsense is not helping anyone. Thank you.
The honourable member for giving way. We all know with the European Union that deadlines sometimes lead to agreements because people have to work to a particular deadline. And if there's never a deadline, all that happens is you're kicking the can down the road and decisions aren't taken. The uncertainty caused by further extension is going to be very, very bad for the economy. Can't we just stick to a deadline and get a deal? Because I think that would be the best thing for Britain.
I take the point about a deadline. I genuinely take the point about a deadline. But the serious question underpinning it is, if it gets up to that deadline, and for whatever reason, the negotiation's going on but the deal isn't ready, what's the position? Is it really the government's position that because deadlines are so important, we will then leave without a deal, walk away from the progress, and crash the country out without it? It is so obviously uncomfortable for the government because they don't want to stand up and intervene on me and tell me what they think the position. I'll give way here, then I will give way behind me.
Right, honourable gentleman for giving way. Does he see the absurdity of his position when he stated that he would do, and I think I'm quoting him, he would do anything to avoid no deal? And yet, every single time he's had a chance to vote for the agreement, he has refused to do so. Does he recognise the absurdity of his position in that regard?
I said from the very start that we should have a meaningful vote on the deal so that we could judge whether it's good enough or not. And we had to fight for that, because the previous Prime Minister was not inclined to give us a vote. We would have had a statement from the dispatch box saying this is the deal. We had to vote, we had to fight for the vote, the right to judge the deal. Well, you say you should have voted for it. That means you vote for any deal. You might as well not have the vote. If the argument is we set out, I'll answer this question, we set out the sort of deal we would support. The previous Prime Minister did not reach out and seek consensus across the House to see whether a deal could be no, she didn't. She did it after the 31st. She did it after the 29th of March, and everybody knows that. Everybody knows that. And I was in those talks, and they were in good faith, and both sides said that. But everybody recognised that those talks should have happened 2 years before they did. And if they had, there might just have been a deal that could have been supported in this House. And it was the policy of the last Prime Minister not to vote for it. But let me just complete on this answer, because it's important, because it goes to this nonsense that the Act that we have passed to secure an extension in certain circumstances somehow undermines the negotiations. No measure was taken by this House to prevent no deal until after the 29th of March. Therefore, for 2 years, the negotiations went forward without any safeguard for no deal, and it didn't produce a deal that went through this House. So it's nonsense to suggest that it undermines the talks. I did say I'd give way, and so I will.
I thank him for giving way. Would he agree with me that if, in fact, the government genuinely do mean do or die and are committed to crashing us out of the European Union after 31st of October with no deal, then the Minister, who earlier refused to answer the question put to him by the Chair of the Select Committee about the impact on Northern Ireland farmers, which would be catastrophic, would then perhaps be willing to come to the House to answer that question?
Well, I hope he would come to the House to answer that question and very many other questions that go with it. My judgment call is that no deal fundamentally affects not only that aspect of our economy but many others, and fundamentally undermines the Good Friday Agreement. And I think there are many members across this House on both sides who would not want to put this country in that position under any circumstances, and therefore even dangling the threat that if the negotiations are still ongoing, we would still leave on the 31st of October on a no-deal basis is absurd. I will give way, and then I am going to make some progress.
The honourable gentleman for giving way. Isn't he somehow amazed, as I am, of the quasi-religious, mystic veneration of the 31st of October that the Brexiteers have developed. This is a date given to them not from on high, but by Donald Tusk in Brussels, that they now venerate and think is cast in tablets of stone. Their position goes from absurdity to absurdity to absurdity.
My principal position is this, that we did the right thing several weeks ago in passing a very simple piece of legislation that says if by next Saturday, this Saturday, the 19th of October, there's neither a deal nor agreement to no deal, then we should take the safeguard of applying for an extension. And that is the law. It's not actually a debating point in this chamber anymore. It was. We debated it, we passed it, that's the law, and that's what needs to happen on Saturday. Because in my experience, everybody says they want a deal, and I don't doubt the sincerity of that. People want different deals, I accept that, but people genuinely want a deal until they see the detail. This is what happened to the previous Prime Minister. Let me just finish the point, and then I'll take an intervention on the point. The last Prime Minister was supported on the proposition of a deal until she brought the deal back and people looked at it. And then they didn't like it. And so there's a danger at the moment in overreaching where we've got to. We do need to wait and see. We need to see what actually comes back in the text. But what happened last time was the principle of a deal was agreed. The detail then was not agreed when it got back here. And that's why the Act we passed several weeks ago is so important. I will give way.
I'm very grateful to the Right Honourable Gentleman for giving way. And I understand the point he makes about the front bench, and I understand the absurdity he points out, potentially. But I would like to ask him, if I may, Madam Deputy Speaker, if he can elucidate for the House exactly what settled Labour Party policy is on a deal which they would accept. And I would hope very much that in the position that he occupies, he should be able to give us a very clear answer that would be backed by all the members of his party sitting behind him.
Yes. Yeah.
I don't know how many times I've stood this dispatch box pressing amendments for a permanent customs union and single market alignment and for a level playing field on workplace rights, environmental rights and consumer rights. Every time I've done it, all but a handful of members on that side of the House have promptly gone into the opposite lobby to me to vote against it. We've now reached a point, and I was asked a question, I'm just going to complete the answer. The 5 propositions around which we could see a deal emerging were set out in a detailed letter from the Leader of the Opposition to the then Prime Minister just before the cross-party talks started. So it may well be that people on this side of the House disagree with what that deal should look like, but the idea that we haven't set it out isn't a fair one. I do think this, though, having got this far, having had 2.5 years of failed deals and division, the only way now to break the impasse is to put whatever the deal is back to the public so that they can make a simple decision. Do we want to leave on the terms that are on offer, or would we not rather remain and break the impasse? And I don't think this House is going to be capable of breaking the impasse without it. I will take an intervention, but I'm going to try and get on.
Right Honourable Gentleman, very much for giving way. And in a spirit of positivity, I just want to probe him slightly further on the point he's just made. Is his position now that he would accept some of the level playing field points that were made in the cross-party talks if they were in the political declaration, or is that no longer Labour Party position, and is he committed to a second referendum under all circumstances?
At this stage, any deal that comes back from this government ought to be put back to the public for them to decide whether they're the terms they want to leave on or not. Now, I came to that position slowly myself, because I thought that if there was consensus built over the 2 or 3 years since the referendum, there might have been a deal we could agree along the lines I've suggested. But that consensus wasn't built. Time's gone by. The deal hasn't gone through, and now we're in a position, I think, where we can't break the impasse without going back and asking that question. I hope that question is asked on the basis of, as it were, the best deal that would be negotiated, and I mean by that the one that does least harm to the economy and best protects the Good Friday Agreement, because they're 2 extremely important red lines as far as I'm concerned. This brings me... I will give way.
I thank my right honourable friend for giving way. He's made a very incisive point, and does he not agree with me that it's actually quite tragic, the mismanagement of this government over the last few years, and how they have tried to monopolise the negotiation on such a critical national issue, and their own partisanship has visited this grief on this country in this way. And that's why the only way now to break this deadlock, this impasse and the acrimony that's built up in our country is by discharging it through a public vote.
Well, I do agree. I can't help, I'm afraid, feeling that we had a Prime Minister in 2015 who promised a referendum we didn't need in order to try and hold his party together, and then a Prime Minister who wouldn't reach for consensus because she was calculating the numbers on her own side instead of the numbers across the House. Now we've got a Prime Minister with an absurd do-or-die pledge, which is counterintuitive for not putting the interests of our country first. But let me just make this broader point, because our concern, our central concern in all of this, has been about the extent to which any deal will protect the economy, jobs, rights and security, not the backstop, and not the border situation in Northern Ireland, which is obviously the intense focus of the discussions that are going on at the moment. And that's why we rejected the last Prime Minister's deal. And it looks like any deal the current Prime Minister manages to secure, if he does, is going to be both worse on the backstop and on the wider question. And on the former, the question of the border in Northern Ireland, a summary of proposals were presented to this House on the 2nd of October about that, but they weren't promising, because it looks from that summary as though the government is going back on the commitments it made in the 2017 joint report, and would unavoidably mean physical infrastructure on the island of Ireland. And those proposals lack any credible mechanism to ensure consent of all communities in Northern Ireland, a central tenet of the Good Friday Agreement. And frankly, it was wrong to go down the route of a veto in Northern Ireland in relation to the Good Friday Agreement, which absolutely depends on the consent of both communities for anything that happens under that agreement. Now, if those proposals have changed significantly, I'd ask the Secretary of State to update the House. But we remain cautious, and we will not support proposals that lead to a hard border in Northern Ireland or undermine the Good Friday Agreement. On the wider issue of the protection of the economy, jobs, rights and security, the Prime Minister's now proposals on changes to the level playing field arrangements tell their own story. The 7-page explanatory memorandum that the Prime Minister put before this House says this, I quote, "There is no need for the extensive level playing field arrangements envisaged in the previous protocol." He's made no secret of the fact that what he wants to do is to step off the level playing field arrangements. I remind the House why those arrangements were previously included and so important, because they ensure the UK cannot deregulate or undercut EU rights and standards. They were always minimum protections. We would have liked them to have been written into the withdrawal agreement. So it's extraordinary and deeply significant that the government now has decided to strip even away these basic protections. And the bigger point is this, because this is not a technical point about what's in or out of this particular deal. It sets us on a course for a distant relationship with the EU and gives the green light to deregulation and to diverge. And that's what this Prime Minister has said is his intention. To diverge is the point of Brexit. And it's really important that we make it clear that that kind of deal, one that rips up the level playing field for those at work, for the environment, for consumers, could never be supported by Labour. It could never be supported by the trade union movement. So if the Prime Minister brings back a deal along these lines, he should have the confidence to put it back to the people in a confirmatory referendum, because such a deal would have profound consequences. And the concern is this, not just the technicalities of the level playing field, although it is a technical question, but the political ramifications. Because once you've decided to diverge from EU rules and regulations, you start down a road to deregulation. And it's obvious where that leads. The focus on trade, on our rights and regulations, will move away from the EU because you move... I'll just finish this point, then I will. Once you say, I don't want to be part of those rules or regulations, I want to diverge, you are moving your gaze away from the EU as your most important trading partners, and your gaze goes elsewhere, across the Atlantic, to a trade deal with the United States with obvious consequences for our public services, for businesses. I will in just a minute. and for food and environmental standards and for workers' rights. Now, I know for some members that's always been the key purpose of Brexit. But it is profound because you move away from a European-style economy with a level playing field, strong rights and protections underpinning that level playing field, to a different economic model based on deregulation, low tax and low standards. In short, you end up with an arm's-length relationship with the EU and you end hand-in-hand with the United States. And that is not something on this side of the House we'll have accountants. I did say I'll give way, no.
To the right honourable gentleman in giving way. And I raised this question with him specifically because he was the former director of public prosecutions. When he talks about rights and international attitudes, this House passed the Magnitsky Act with regards to sanctions on those who abuse human rights. We're talking about Britain's place in the world. If the government looks to put forward those rules through Parliament on sanctions against those who violate human rights, will the right honourable gentleman agree with me that in that legislation we should put our values clear, put religious freedom there, put modern slavery there, put freedom of media in that, so we are clear where we stand on those sanctions on those individuals who violate human rights?
Let me just answer that and draw on my experience. Because it is perfectly true that we want to collaborate and cooperate across the world on important issues to us, including modern slavery. And I have paid tribute in part, and I do so again to the previous Prime Minister for what she did on modern slavery. She took it very seriously and put forward serious legislation before the House, which made a real difference not only in this country but across the world. But the most intense work we do, with the best arrangements, are with the EU. On counter-terrorism, we have arrangements in place across the world. Of course we do. But the best and the most intense are with the EU by a country mile. I'll just finish this point. They are far more effective in so many respects. The ability to share intelligence with our EU partners is on a different footing to other countries across the world. The enforcement mechanisms, to take a simple example, if you've got every terrorist cell that I ever ended up prosecuting operated across borders. And one of the vital questions in those circumstances, do you have the necessary arrangements to carry out the arrest of that cell and assess its intelligence together as a group? That is available through Eurojust. Do you have a strategy for making sure that your arrests are all carried out at the same time? Do you have a protocol for deciding where the prosecution will take place so that it's likely to be most successful? And equally, do you have rules about whether evidence captured in one country can be used in the other? All of that is available to us as a member of the EU. All of that falls away, particularly on a no-deal Brexit. Technical it may be, saved lives it did in huge numbers. I will give way.
On the subject of intelligence, the right honourable gentleman knows full well that our many intelligence allies under Five Eyes are not actually within the EU. But he makes an important point. Of course it's important we continue to share intelligence on everyday matters with the EU, and I for one do not believe that the EU will not want to do that, otherwise the United Kingdom will be the weak link in their chain. But he makes, if I might say so, a fundamental mistake when he presents his argument as a binary choice in terms of trade between the EU and the US, thereby neglecting about two-thirds of the world, including some of the fastest emerging markets in the world, which are not in the EU, and they're not the US, the Commonwealth countries, and other countries further afield. Those are where our future markets lie.
Firstly, on the question of security, I well understand the Five Eyes arrangements in terms of intelligence sharing. But even with the Five Eyes countries, we've got problems with extradition. I did many extraditions to the US. They take years. They're hugely complicated. The evidence has to be tested in a different way here before you can extradite someone to the US, and vice versa. And sometimes you can't extradite because there are conditions around it. Compare that with EU extradition, which takes days. We had bombings in London, as we all know, the 7/7 bombings. We forget that 2 weeks after that bombing, there was another attempted bombing, which only didn't succeed because the explosives devices were damp, 5 of them. And one of the individuals who tried to detonate a bomb in Shepherd's Bush ran off to Italy. And we had him back here within 60 days under the EU extradition arrangements. He was then tried in Woolwich, and he's now serving 40 years. That is what happens under a European arrest warrant and extradition. We don't have those arrangements with the Five Eyes countries. We simply don't. And I'm not doubting the intelligence side of it. I'm talking about the practical enforcement of counter-terrorism measures. That is the reality of it. It's why this do or die will leave without a deal is so wrong for our country. I will give way.
The right honourable gentleman is making a great speech, but I would ask him: isn't there a huge question mark over the Schengen information system, the largest database in the world? And if we don't have access to that, our citizens will be under threat.
I do agree with that, and it chimes with what I was saying. I think there was a second part of the challenge that was put to me that I haven't yet addressed, which is surely our future lies elsewhere than other than trading with the EU. I don't accept that. What is this argument? That somehow not trading with the countries that we trade most with, and just, well, maybe if I finish, you can then come straight back in. The EU, through EU trade arrangements, we have access to another 67 countries. So the best part of 100 countries are available to us through EU membership because of the trade deals the EU has done. So you've got the original 27. Just let me finish the point and then you can shout at me. Why wait? It might be worth waiting. 27 countries we directly deal with as a result of the customs union single market in a most effective way, and every business in the country that trades with Europe says they're excellent relations. Through the EU membership, we have another 67 countries that we deal with on EU trade agreements. That's nearly half the world. So this argument that somehow there's a brilliant tomorrow out there that's got nothing to do with the brilliant arrangements we've got in place is something I've never seen evidenced or argued. In fact, I looked through the government's impact assessments when finally we're allowed to see them for evidence that these new trade agreements were going to make up for all the loss, and it wasn't there. The government's own assessment said we'll be worse off as a result of leaving the customs union. I will give way.
Sorry for missing the very beginning of the debate, but I had a meeting with the Aviation Minister. I want to go back to his point about he believes that this is a very bad deal for workers' rights and so on, and I completely accept that is the Labour point of view, and it should be put to a referendum. I accept that is their point of view. If it were to be put to a referendum and the public voted for that deal, even though the Labour Party feel it's not the deal they would like, and then there were to be a Labour government, would they implement that deal? Because it is important to know that even if they disagree with the deal, because there's going to be a huge amount of legislation that will go with any deal, that they would deliver the deal despite their misgivings about the deal.
Thank you for that question. Let me be clear about my position. I think if we go down this road of having a referendum, and it must be between a negotiated deal and Remain, and by a negotiated deal I mean one that the EU would actually sign off, because I don't think it's fair to people to offer an option to leave that isn't a proper option. I would go further than that. I would advocate in this House that we actually pass the implementation legislation subject to a coming into force date or something like that to show that it could be done straight away, because I think we would have to show it had been secured with the EU and therefore could be delivered, and also that we'd already put in place the means to deliver it in this place, so we could actually resolve this one way or the other within a short period of time. And I now think it's the only way to break the impasse. I'm going to make some progress, and I have taken a lot of interventions. But that is the approach we take on this side, and that is because we believe in international cooperation and in upholding international law, and that we need to work alongside our closest and most important allies. And let me just take one example of that: climate change. I listened very carefully to what the Secretary of State said. This Queen's speech has 22 bills. Yet what was there actually on climate change in the speech? One mention in the final paragraph. Yet the climate emergency should be the issue around which our politics evolves and revolves. It is the foreign policy challenge of our time. It's the defining issue of global security, and it should be the focus of the UK's diplomatic and development efforts. It should have been the centrepiece of this Queen's speech, not Brexit. And I think the fact that it got just one mention is a measure of the government's lack of leadership on this central issue. So, Mr. Speaker, this Queen's speech was entirely unnecessary. It's packed with bills that the government knows are never going to get passed. It fails to recognise, let alone tackle, any of the huge challenges we face. and shows the government is oblivious to the need for radical change. And frankly, it's the weakest defence imaginable for the decision to prorogue Parliament for 5 weeks, which was unlawful and obviously unnecessary. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.